Let's see where we're up to. We're up to chapter 23. I guess I want to start before we review. Let's start with a question. If you had to explain what is the point of doing mitzvahs, what would you say? Someone says, oh, you do something Jewish, and they're like, oh, what is that? Oh, it's a mitzvah. What's the point of doing mitzvahs?
Connection with Hashem.
Oh, you're already so deep. You dove right in. Yeah, but you're right. What else? What else do people sometimes offer? So, sometimes you hear reasoning given for mitzvahs, or people say, it's a nice tradition, it maintains our culture.
So we
It,
just did this last week when I made a donation for my mom's birthday. They say that mitzvot elevate the soul of someone who's no longer here to do mitzvahs on earth and to be God's hands and heart and legs on earth. So if you do a mitzvah in someone's honor, it elevates their soul. So that's just
Right.
a thought. We can't
You've
prove,
all been
can't
in,
prove
you've all been
that
in
one.
Tanya. You've all been in Tanya for a long time, so you have all these great, ideas. I do believe that many people whom you ask, why do Jews do mitzvahs? What's the point of mitzvahs?
Yeah.
Yes, Arlene, you want to say something?
I was just thinking when the mitzvah is not you and God, but person to person, typically it would be a lovely thing to do, a kind thing to do, a generous thing to do. And you would do that because you want to benefit another person. And as an offshoot of that, you're showing how a Jewish person behaves in a very, very good fashion.
100%. There's a whole category of mitzvahs, between man and man that are there to create a more kind, just, peaceful world. That answer would work for a lot of those mitzvahs, except when someone says, well, then mitzvah of slaughtering animals, how does that bring peace to the world? Or, name any other interesting mitzvah of not mixing meat and milk, like whom is that benefiting? And there's a lot more mitzvahs. So yes, definitely that the mitzvahs that are within that realm of the humanitarian category, we see the benefit. Chapter 23 does something very interesting. Many of you noticed that in the last few chapters we kind of deviated from our main thought process in Tanya. The main thought process in Tanya was not intended to be very philosophical. It's very practical. How do we connect to God? How do we become close? How do we, God says it's very hikaro velacha, it's very close to you. How's it close to you? And we've been following a whole, every chapter's been building on the other. And for the last few chapters, we kind of deviated and spent some time on this thought that's very philosophical, where we spoke about what is reality? Are we real? Do we exist? Are we just God's imagination? Are we in God's head? Are we outside of God? Are we physical beings having spiritual experiences? Are we spiritual beings having physical experiences? And the deviation was there for a reason. In chapter 23, we're kind of coming back to the main. Oh, look at that. We're matching mugs. The deviation was there for a reason, because what we're trying to answer is, okay, I'm not sure we go into the whole thought process, but we were trying to understand really what comes to in chapter 23 is, what is the point of everything that we're doing? What are we accomplishing? How is doing a mitzvah or studying Torah, how is any of that accomplishing anything or doing anything in the world? So just to summarize, in the last few chapters, we spent a lot of time basically establishing the fact that essentially we are swimming in God's infinite light. We and everything around us are truly just godliness in various levels of revelation and concealment. There's nothing, Tanya said, the fact that God is one, when we say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, it's not saying there's only one God and there aren't multiple gods. You know, that's elementary. We all know that. What we're saying in the Shema is that everything is God. God is one because God is unity. All of creation is really all part of God. Now, you know, we spent a lot of time on this because we had to understand, you know, how could it be from my perspective that I can make whatever choices I want? If I'm part of God, how can I do things that go against God? And we spoke about the idea of tzimtzum, that God um, contracts himself, so to speak, in order to create situations where God is not revealed in an obvious way. And the reason God does that is to allow for choice. In order to allow us to truly choose him, he needs to give us the option to not choose him. And in order to give us the option to not choose him, there needs to be elements of creation in which godliness is so concealed that you don't even see that it's godly in any way. We gave an example, I think it was last class, of the, you know, the CEO who walks into his own company and gets carded and checked at the entrance. He did a very, very good job of concealing his identity that his own employees don't recognize him and don't realize who they're really working for. Once we've established that and we've said that everything is really godliness with varying gradations of revelation and concealment, now we're coming back to saying that with every action that I take in this world, I have the opportunity to either affirm God's oneness or deny his oneness. Affirm his unity or deny his unity. Sorry, one second. Someone just came in. Okay, I guess we'll see who that is. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, hi. Okay, I didn't see your name. I was trying to figure out who came in with the 770, 770.
I just
Um,
minutes ago. It's a wrong time. It's over. Okay.
That's okay. So basically, what the Tanya is coming back to do in chapter 23 is telling us, now that we've established that everything is truly godliness, I can realize that with every one of my actions, I have the opportunity to either fulfill the first commandment, which is, I am the Lord your God, affirming that there is one God, or I have the opportunity to, God forbid, violate the second commandment, which is, you shall not have any other gods. Because what I am able to do with my actions is basically say, yes, I acknowledge this is all God's world, or to say, yeah, you know what? God has his opinion, but I have my opinion, and I don't want to follow God's opinion at this point. This time I want to do, you know, what I think is the right thing. In other words, what our chapter is going to tell us is that when I do a mitzvah, my reality becomes fully in tune with God's reality. At that moment, I could be completely one with God by fulfilling his will. You know, sometimes, I know we discussed this a long time ago, but there's some people who think of mitzvahs as like this arbitrary, you know, point system. You know, it's like, well, God has all these lists of things that he wants us to do, and you get points if you do them. Maybe you lose points if you don't do them. That's really cheapening the whole idea of a mitzvah. If the act itself didn't have value, so that's very demeaning. Well, God's just asking us to do these, you know, pointless things, and he's just going to pay us to do them. When we study Tanya, the Tanya is going to explain to us that the act of doing the mitzvah is so powerful that we're actually tapping into the very essence and reason for all of creation. Let's read it inside. It'll hopefully be a little more clear. I'm going to share my screen, chapter 23. Right here. Okay. So in the light of everything that has been said above, we can better understand and more fully and clearly elucidate the statement in the Zohar that the Torah and God are entirely one. And the commentary in the Tikkunei Zohar, which is a commentary on the Zohar, that the 248 commandments are the 248 organs of the king. So just to clarify that, we all know that there's 613 commandments in the Torah. They're divided into 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. The Tikkunei Zohar tells us that the 248 positive commandments correspond to 248 organs or limbs, so to speak, of God's body. And obviously, this is just imagery. God doesn't have a body and it's not actually divided into limbs, but it's our way. We're going to understand in a minute why the Zohar uses this terminology precisely. And the 365 negative commandments correspond to 365 sinews, which is we're going to get into in, I believe, in next chapter. What's the idea of limbs of a body? If you think about it, we actually had this, I think we had this discussion with Harriet, right? You were saying that maybe you were quoting a book where someone says, we're all familiar with, there's the person, and God forbid, after 120, the person's no longer here. Where are the person's thoughts, right? Where are the person's opinions? Where are the person's likes and dislikes? Like, if all of our thoughts and ideas exist on some level, on which level do they exist? So if I were to sum it up, that whole what we'll call the spiritual dimension of a person is the person's soul. It's the spiritual that now obviously there are different levels of soul and there's different parts of our soul, but definitely our soul is that part of us that makes us who we really are. When I think of myself, I don't think of my back, my stomach, my legs, my arms. I think of me. Now it's confusing because when I think of myself, I do think of the physical me, but I know I'm not really thinking of the physical me. I'm thinking of the me who's my ideas, my thoughts, the inner me. If I were to try to explain what the Tanya seems to be saying here, is that let's say the spiritual part of me, my thoughts, my desires, my spirituality, my connection to God, all of that is my soul. My soul kind of has two coverings. The first one is my body, and the second one are my clothes. My body is a very, very close shell for my soul. It's not one with my soul. It's not the same. God, for after 120, when a person passes on, regardless of what happens to their body, their soul ascends. So our body and our soul are not actually one, but they do work so closely and in sync with each other, to the extent that when I have an idea of something I want to do, I just do it. I don't need to have a conversation with my arm to tell my arm that I would like to get something done. Because I want to do it, my arm will do it for me. I want to go somewhere, my legs start walking almost as immediately as that thought comes to my mind. So the relationship between body and soul is very, very close. What the Tanya is going to explain here is that the 248 positive commandments being limbs of God is basically saying that when I fulfill one of the 248 mitzvahs, I basically become like a body to God. The same relationship that a body has to soul, I become to God at that moment. Because God has the desire, and I am fulfilling the desire. It's like I have the thought I would like to go shopping, and then I start going shopping. So my body is working so in sync with my soul. That's the relationship that I have with God in the moment that I am fulfilling God's will. Let's read it inside, and then we'll stop for questions. So, for the mitzvahs constitute God's innermost will and his true desire, which is clothed in all the upper and lower worlds, thereby giving them life. I wanna stop for a second. I know we mentioned this previously. I want to mention it again. Talking about desires, right? If I meet a business person and the business person tells me, I really would like to fly to France for a business trip. And I say, oh, why do you want to fly to France? They say, oh, because there's a good business opportunity there. All right. And why would you like to engage in those business opportunities? And the person tells me, well, because I'd like to close a deal, right? I want to make money. And why do you want to make that money? Well, I want to spend it on, we could each give our own answer. Ultimately, what it boils down to, that yes, they do want to go to France on some level, but the deeper reason why they want to go to France is to close a business deal. And the deeper reason that they want to close the business deal is so that they have money. And the real reason they want to have money is because there's a particular thing that they like to do with that money. This is what Hasidic teachings call external will and internal will. Wanting to go to France is a real will, it's a desire, but it's an external will because it's only external to the more inner desire to close the deal, which is only external to a more inner desire to make money, which is itself only external to a more inner desire, which is whatever the person wants to spend their money on. Most of the things that we do in life, for most people, if you start asking all those whys, well, why do you want to do this? And why do you want that? And why do you want that? We really kind of boil down to just, very few true desires, right? We desire to live. And because we desire to live, there's a lot of things that we want to do in order to feel like we're really living. We desire, hopefully, many of us desire to love and to connect to people, and that also drives a lot of what we do. But regardless, whatever we do, whatever we want to do, there's always an inner desire until we can get to our innermost desire. So back to God creating the world, if we say everything exists because God wills it to exist, right? So the tree wouldn't exist if God didn't want the tree. Why does God want this tree? Oh, God wanted this tree to be used for something. Well, why would God want this tree to be used for this thing? Because God, if you're going to go down to God's most essential desires, what's his most essential desire? God's most essential desire, the Zohar tells us, is for Jews to fulfill mitzvahs. That is his innermost desire. And it's actually hinted in the very first word of the Torah. The first word in the Torah is Bereshit. Bereshit, where the Zohar tells us, is Bet Reshit. Two things were at the beginning. There were two things on God's mind when he set out to create the world. And those two things were the Jewish people and the Torah. Everything that God created in the world is because he wanted to enable the Jewish people so he had to create people so that he could also have a Jewish people. He had to create things that you can utilize to fulfill the Torah and Mitzvahs. He had to create things that you should not utilize because he wants you to actually choose to fulfill the Torah and Mitzvahs and to have many choices and not just to do the only thing that's possible for you to do. But ultimately, what chapter 23 is highlighting for us is that God's innermost desire is for mitzvahs to be done. So when I am engaged in doing a mitzvah, at that moment, I'm literally becoming the body to God. I'm connecting with him so directly. My relationship with God at that moment that I'm doing the mitzvah is like a body to a soul. And the one more example that the Tanya gives is the example of a chariot, which I know we've mentioned a few times in the past. The idea of a chariot, which these days we probably would say a car quicker than a chariot. What's the goal of a car? To get us places. But a car could only go wherever the driver wants the car to go, right? You never really meet a car that has its own desires of where it wants to drive. I mean, if you do, you might need to take it to the mechanic. I was actually watching my kids biking outside earlier today, and I thought of this because one of my kids ran his had a hard time controlling his bike, and let's just say he ran his bike into a car, a parked car on the side of the road, and he comes back and he's like, whatever bike. This bike just drives wherever it wants to go. And I'm thinking, oh my, this is today's Tanya. But yeah, a real car, a real bike, chariot could only go wherever the driver directs it. That's similar to the relationship between a body and soul. My body could only go wherever I want it to go. If, God forbid, someone's body is doing things that they don't want to do, if someone is saying things that they don't really want to say, that's what we call an illness. Something is not well there. Because in a functional body, whatever you want to say is what you will say, and what you don't want to say, you won't say. And where you want to go is where you're going to lead your body to go. So imagine just having that relationship with God, even for a moment, but every moment's eternal. When I am giving charity, at that moment, I am literally becoming the body, the chariot to God's will of giving charity. This is the purpose for which he created the whole entire world. And at this moment, I am aligning myself with the purpose of all of creation. Let's stop for a minute and take questions if anyone has, and then I want to kind of later tie it back into our bigger train of thought here. Anyone have thoughts or questions? All right, that was easy.
I mean, I think
okay.
it makes sense that we are feeling at one with God when you're doing good things. I feel like, when you're kind, when you're feeding the homeless, when you're visiting the sick, when you're doing these things that allow you to quote unquote be God's hands and feet on earth, of course you feel more connected. Of course you feel that oneness, that like your heart just feeling very full, rather than the times when you're at your lowest, basest self and you're like, fighting with someone so I think that makes perfect sense that you feel that connection when you are doing good, and you don't feel that connection when you are not doing good. So
But
that seems a little simplistic to me. I guess
I want to take that a little further. I hear what you're saying. What the
yeah.
Torah is telling us here is it's not about actions that I perceive to be good or don't perceive to be good. It's anytime I fulfill a mitzvah, one of the 248 commandments. Now, there are some mitzvahs that feel very good to do. There are some mitzvahs that feel good to do sometimes and don't feel good to do other times. I might feel very inspired to light Shabbat candles on time when my week went well and I'm ready for a break, and I've got the candles, I got my food ready, all's good. I am ready to have this beautiful experience of welcoming Shabbat. What if I just got a check in the mail and I really need to make this deposit? But I know that if I drive to the bank now to deposit the check, I will not make it back to do Shabbat on time. And in order for me to now stop everything and light my Shabbat candles and disconnect, doesn't actually feel very good. It feels there's a lot of tension there. So we could fulfill mitzvahs by appealing to our emotion, but the Tanya is not appealing to our emotion. The Tanya, following the concept of Chabad, which is intellect. It's all intellect based. Now, yes, a lot of it we do talk a lot about emotion, and the Tanya tells us we need to arouse our emotions and get our emotions aligned with our intellect. But right now, the Tanya says, I'm going to tell you a truth. This is a truth, and the truth is that God created the world for these mitzvahs to be done. Every time you fulfill one of these mitzvahs, whether you feel it or not, whether you like it or not, whether you understand it or not, at that moment, you are connected to the Creator in an unbelievable way. Now, there are some times that, just like we said, sometimes doing a mitzvah feels good, sometimes doing a mitzvah doesn't feel good. Sometimes doing the opposite of a mitzvah feels like that would be good. But that's why the Tanya really focuses on knowledge. Like it's not feelings based. Feelings, we need feelings. We need to have emotion in serving God. But we need to first serve based on what we know, not just based on how we feel. Does that explain it? Does that make it a little deeper?
I mean, no, I guess to me, no.
Okay.
No, I think, according to this way of seeing things, right? According to what you're talking about, there is a hard line between what is Bubba is giving his opinion between what is asked or told to be done and what's wrong. Like there's a line between right and wrong. And it's pretty hard and it's pretty laid out, right? So in the times, and I'm not saying that we all do this, in the times that we're able to meet those hard and fast things on the good side of the line, you feel good. You feel more aligned with God. You feel like you're living your best life. And you feel, I think that mitzvot allow you to feel that closeness. So to me, it is a feeling because I get it that according to you know, the way we're discussing this, there's a hard line. But I may just be doing 5 of those things, not 200 and however many,
48.
2. Okay, I may not reach all 248.
Now, so
Yeah.
Lauren, I
So
want to
if
say a
I'm
few things
doing
about
my
that.
5, wait, let me finish my thoughts.
Okay.
If I'm doing my 5 and I feel so good and so connected doing my 5, okay, I'm good doing my 5. Now here's the crazy thing. My child who has wrapped in well, his first time was with your husband, right? Shmuley wrapped Cameron the first time. I know I'm saying that wrong, but that's a mitzvah, right? That's a mitzvah. Cameron wanted to do that mitzvah in Italy, in Rome, next to a guard with an AK, 2 guards with AK-47s. He's like, "Do you think we're safe, Mom?" And I'm like, "Probably aren't safer anywhere than right here. Like anyone comes at you while you're getting wrapped. I mean, those guards are going to take care of you." Like he wanted to go do that mitzvah. And it's not even a mitzvah that Cameron really does. He's not a, what's it called? Deanie, what's it called? The wrapping.
The fill-in?
So, yeah, he's only done it twice. And so that's what I'm saying. He felt really compelled. He felt really good and really, we talked about it. Like he felt something. So I disagree. I have to disagree. I get it that you think there's a hard line between we're supposed to do these 248. I'm telling you where I'm coming from. It's a feeling to me.
Okay. So
'Cause I'm
I
not
want
a
to try to
not a
reconcile that.
248 person. I'm not a 248. But let's say that I'm a 5 and my son wants to go do number 6 that he's only done one other time in his life, and that was with your husband. Holy moly, he is feeling the mitzvot. So that's what I'm saying. To me, it's a feeling. So I disagree. So
Okay. So
that's okay.
I
That's
want to
okay.
try to reconcile that. There's 2 things. You brought in another dimension, which is important to mention, and that's the idea of personal growth, right? None of us, when no one's suggesting, I don't know if there's anyone who's at the level where they're actually fulfilling all 613 commandments perfectly, precisely, and every time, right? That doesn't exist. We're all trying, and we've said this before, we're all in different places in the ladder. We're all trying to work our way up. That's That's though not what the Tanya is discussing here. That's something that we generally discuss. And yes, everyone's trying to, you're doing 5, aim for 6, you're doing 6, aim for 7. What the Tanya is emphasizing to us here is not so much my personal growth, but giving us a peek at the truth of reality. You want to know the spiritual truth? The spiritual truth is that every single one of the commandments, when you fulfill them, in the moment that you fulfill that commandment, you are aligning yourself with the truth of reality. You're connecting yourself with the highest, most spiritual power. Now, ultimately, yes, I agree with you that when someone is living a life that is aligned with the truth, they will feel good about it in the big picture. It doesn't mean, though, that every time I do a mitzvah, I'm going to feel it's gonna be easy for me. Because if every time I do a mitzvah it's easy for me, then perhaps I need to ask myself, am I doing mitzvahs based on my emotions or based on my knowledge? If I'm only doing a mitzvah that feels right, that inspires me in the moment, so then am I doing a mitzvah because God wants me to, or am I doing the mitzvah because it feels good to do this mitzvah? What the Tanya is saying here is that putting our emotions and our feelings aside, there is a truth, there's an objective truth that every time I fulfill a mitzvah, I am connecting with God in this way. Through knowing this, I would argue actually that this knowledge can enable me to have positive emotions about it, because there are always things that are going to be hard. I mean, when I get a paycheck and I know that I need to give 10% of my salary to charity, and sometimes it's a struggle. And there's a lot of other really good things that I can do with that 10%. And it's not always easy to cut it off and say this is going to go to charity, regardless of how badly I wanted to buy, something else. The Torah commands us to honor our parents. Depending on our situations, depending on what's going on, there are definitely situations in which honoring one's parents is a very difficult thing for certain people at certain times. So if a person's only going to do the mitzvahs that they're inspired to do at that moment, they're leading a life that's guided by their heart and their inspiration. The Tanya is trying to show us how we can align ourselves with God's vision for us. God didn't say, I'm giving you 613, this is a smorgasbord. Pick the ones that inspire you at the moment that they inspire you and skip the rest. He said, no, I want you to live your life aligned with these. And so the Tanya is giving us the intellectual understanding of what happens when I engage in these mitzvahs. Maybe knowing that will help me. Maybe the next time I come across a mitzvah and I'm having a hard time in the moment. I mean, something smells really good and I really want to eat it, but I also know it's not kosher. And it's like, who really cares? What difference is it going to make? Wait, if I know that in this moment when I'm choosing the kosher item, I am literally connecting to God on a deep level, that knowledge, again, can help realign my emotions and can help shift my emotions. So I think we're saying the same thing, Lorraine. I think we're just looking at it from two different perspectives, whereas you're looking very much at, the personal angle, my personal journey, where I'm finding inspiration, whereas what the Tanya is focusing on here is trying to give us the dimension of what actually happens when I engage in the mitzvah, whether I feel it or not. Hopefully I feel it, and I'll always try to feel it. But what is actually happening in the cosmos at this moment that I'm choosing to fulfill a mitzvah?
So, okay, so maybe you're talking about it from a technical, like, where is that dark line? Where's that black line drawn in the sand? And I'm talking about it from an emotional standpoint. When you do mitzvahs, whether whichever number you're on, there is a feeling of connection that drives you to want to do the mitzvahs. Like when I do Shabbat with my kids, I am beaming ear to ear. We've called Lisa sometimes, like in the middle, and we are so happy and we are so joyful and we are so
You ever
connected.
do a mitzvah that you don't enjoy doing?
No,
If there is a mitzvah presented to you,
I would enjoy doing it. I don't understand that. If it's a mitzvah, you're going to enjoy doing it because it's God's will.
what
So
if it's your favorite food, but it's not kosher?
I mean, I cheat because I'm a vegetarian, so like it's so easy for me, you know? That one's not that I'm not a good one to ask about that.
Okay.
Really, because I mainly eat vegetables and yeah, I'm not a good one
Okay,
for
but
that.
I'm sure, Lauren, I'm sure if you think about it, there definitely are mitzvahs that you haven't taken upon yourself yet because
100%.
they're
But what
hard.
I'm saying is, if you take them upon yourself, you feel joyful and happy. Like, how can you feel bad doing a mitzvah? I don't understand. That's where I'm having the disconnect. If I'm doing a mitzvah, and granted, I don't do all of them, so maybe that's part of the problem. Is maybe I don't do any that make me feel bad. I can't imagine doing a mitzvah that makes you feel bad. I guess
So I
that's
think
my
that
block.
So I think that makes you feel bad if it does happen, it's in the moment. In the bigger picture, yes, you know you're doing the right thing, and there's a joy that comes from knowing you're doing the right thing. But in the moment, when you're facing that coworker that just messed you over, that you really feel like, yelling at them and you have the opportunity to get them back, and you choose not to, and you know they really deserved it, you know, it's it's not necessarily easy. It was a tough choice. But you made that choice because you knew that was the right thing. So in the moment, it was hard. Biting my tongue was hard. Yes, I'm going to go home. I'm going to think about it. I think I'll eventually feel good about it because I know that what I did was in alignment with what I'm supposed to do. But similarly, every mitzvah, some of them, if most of the mitzvahs come easy to someone, that's great. For most people, and for everyone it's different. Everyone's going to have those mitzvahs that come hard to them. But I think I do think that we agree. I just think we're looking at it from different angles, and I want to make sure that we don't completely lose our train of thought. So if you're okay with it, let's try to get back to the thought stream of the Tanya. Unless Harriet, I think you also had something to say.
So the place where I'm struggling is studying Torah, living Torah, doing mitzvot, and and having intention about doing them. And it I think I read something about that, or maybe it's in one of the prayers, that the study of Torah is greater than all of the mitzvot. So that's
Yes.
and I don't know if that's part of this
That is
lesson or.
actually, it's right in this chapter. You're right. You're right on track with this chapter. So the chapter began by saying the 248 positive mitzvahs. A mitzvah is a way to connect to God. If so, what is studying Torah? A great example I heard for this was, imagine there is a fantastic designer, a world famous designer who designs an incredibly beautiful building. And now you have a group of architects, and the architects study the design, and now they are going to fulfill the designer's wish and dream and create the building and basically execute this designer's vision. That's an incredible thing. They are literally it's like Merkava. They're becoming like a car to the driver, right? The driver is the designer, the visionary, and the team, the architects, are executing the vision. Another example would be this team of architects is invited to sit down with the designer and study the design, study the blueprint together with the designer. Which one is greater? I mean, they're both incredible. One of them, they're executing the vision of the designer. The other one, they're literally sitting and getting into the brain of the designer. They're like sitting with the designer and studying the blueprints with the designer. That would be how this chapter describes doing mitzvahs and studying the Torah. When I do the mitzvah, I'm executing God's will. I'm becoming God's body because I'm literally doing this design that He created the whole world for. When I'm studying Torah, I'm sitting with the designer and I'm literally like studying his design. So in that way, you could definitely say that studying Torah is greater. There's something higher about it than mitzvahs. We need both ultimately, but there is something very powerful about the study of Torah that allows me to get into the brain of the designer. Um, that's an even deeper connection. You know, if we're going to say fulfilling the mitzvahs is like becoming a body to the soul is God, the body is us. Studying Torah is basically connecting with God's soul. Like we're literally getting into God's brain by studying his Torah. But I think we should let's read it inside so we get a maybe better perspective, or maybe it says it a little clearer. Hang on. Share. There we go. Okay, so just finishing off with the idea of fulfilling mitzvahs. The very life and sustenance of all the world is dependent upon the performance of mitzvot by creatures of the lower worlds, as it is known that performing a mitzvah draws godly life and sustenance into the world. If you think about it for a minute, if we say that God's entire purpose in creation was for mitzvahs to be fulfilled, so the reason he created everything, I mean, the sky and the trees and the mountains and the oceans and people and animals and weather and ideas and philosophy, everything that exists around me was created for the purpose of mitzvah being fulfilled. So when I fulfill a mitzvah at that moment, I am literally powering all of creation. At the moment that I hold my match to light the Shabbat candle, I'm sustaining spiritually the entire world, because the whole world was created for this moment of me standing there and fulfilling this particular mitzvah. It follows that the performance and fulfillment of the mitzvot is the innermost garment for the innermost aspect of God's will, since it is due to this performance of the mitzvot that the light and the life of the world issue forth from the divine will to be clothed in them. This is what we mentioned, the inner will and the outer will. Everything in the world is God's will. If he didn't will it, it wouldn't exist. But the innermost part of God's will is the fulfillment of the mitzvot. So when I fulfill a mitzvah, I'm tapping into God's innermost will. Hence, the mitzvot are figuratively described as the organs of the king. For just as organs of the human body are a garment for its soul and are completely and utterly surrendered to it, it's evident from as is evident from the fact that as soon as a person desires to stretch out his hand or foot, they obey his will immediately without any command or instruction to them, without any delay. But at the very instant that it entered his will to do so. So meaning, just as a person's body is so connected to their soul because it literally is the garment of the soul and the expression of the soul, when I fulfill a mitzvah at that moment, I am literally I have that same kind of union with God in that moment. I want to go to the section where it talks about the Torah. For example, the hand which distributes charity. Okay, so this is it. Sorry, just a side note. Not just at this moment, I am powering all of creation, but I am elevating. It's not just the act that I'm doing, the very limb of my body that I am using to fulfill this mitzvah is being elevated. And every item that I am using to fulfill the mitzvah is also being elevated. So, for example, the hand which distributes charity to the poor or performs another commandment becomes, in the act of performing a mitzvah, a chariot for the divine will. Similarly, the feet that walk for the purpose of fulfilling a mitzvah, or the mouth and the tongue that speak the words of Torah, or the brain that's reflecting on the Torah or on the fear of heaven or on the greatness of God, any part of my body that's involved in fulfilling a mitzvah at that moment, like my arm, think of it as like, it's like becoming God's arm in this moment. And every item that I'm using to fulfill the mitzvah, the ink, the wood, the car, the house, is all being elevated in this way. Think of how many mitzvahs you performed in your house and how holy your house is just by the fact that mitzvahs were fulfilled in this house, and this house enabled these mitzvahs to be fulfilled. You know, it says that when in the future, when Mashiach comes, it says the stones will speak, and the stones will talk about the actions, the mitzvahs that came about through them. And they're going to talk about their, we don't see a stone's experience. We don't see my house's experience, so to speak. but there's an experience that's happening. And every item in creation that I'm utilizing for the fulfillment of the mitzvah is being connected to God at this moment. So now let's talk about the Torah, as Harriet asked. I'm just going to skip down. Here, I'm on page 5 right here. But the thought and meditation on words of Torah. So this is different than fulfilling mitzvahs. When I fulfill a mitzvah, I'm using my mouth, I'm using my arms, I'm using my legs, whatever it is that I'm using to fulfill a mitzvah. When I'm studying Torah, it's thought, it's meditation, it's brain power, and there's often speech involved. We say when actually it says that one of the reasons it's so powerful to study Torah out loud is because then I kind of get both. I'm doing a mitzvah because I am utilizing my mouth to speak words of Torah, which is a mitzvah, and at the same time I'm utilizing my brain to comprehend the Torah. So I'm able to engage in both of these at the same time. The thought and meditation on the words of Torah, which is accomplished in the brain, and the power of speech engaged in the words of Torah, which is the mouth, these being the innermost garments of the divine soul. We said our soul expresses itself in thought, speech, and action. Action being most external, speech being a little more internal, and thought being the most internal expression of our soul. And surely the divine self itself, which is clothed in them, all of them are fused in perfect unity with the divine will and are not merely a vehicle or a chariot for it. Meaning, in the moment, like we said before, when I study Torah, it's like I'm sitting with the designer and getting into his brain. I'm literally exploring the design, I'm so deeply and intimately connected with the designer when I'm studying the designer's design. So similarly, when I'm studying Torah, when I'm understanding, some elements of Torah feel very spiritual to study. Some parts of Torah, it's like I'm studying the law of like what makes something kosher versus non-kosher, which dishes I can mix with which dishes. Some of that seems very mundane, like just for me sitting and understanding these, why is it such a big deal? Well, actually, when I sit and I understand Torah, that's me sitting and studying the design. That's a very, very deep unity that I'm experiencing at this moment with the designer himself. For the divine will is identical with the halachic subject which one thinks and speaks, inasmuch as the laws of the halacha are a particular expression of the innermost divine will itself. For God willed it thus that a particular thing be deemed permissible or kosher, or that this person be found exempt. And basically, all of these details, when I study Jewish law or any part of Torah, I have to remember that if it's part of Torah, it's literally part of God's design for the world. It's part of God's will. So not just knowing it because I need to fulfill it, but even studying a law that I may never get to fulfill in my life. Studying, details of exactly how certain parts of the temple need to be built. Say, what's the point of studying that? I was never involved in building the temple. I highly doubt I'm going to be hired as the craftsman to, build the third temple when Mashiach comes. Why should I study these details? Well, there's something amazing about studying those details, because when I study those details, I'm literally connecting myself with God's design, with the, with the brains behind this masterpiece, which is a very, very deep connection. Let's see if there's any other part that we missed. The bottom line is, if I want to just kind of sum up where this chapter comes in and what this chapter aims to do, we had been talking about the fact that every one of us has a very deep love for God and a very deep desire to be connected to God and never to be disconnected. And the examples that we brought to prove this were the many examples throughout history, even very recent history, where we see that when a Jewish person has been faced with, giving up their faith or denouncing their connection to God, very often they hesitate to do so, even if they were not a very pious person in their lifetime. A Jewish person, regardless of how religious they are, will very rarely be okay converting to another faith or saying, I'm no longer Jewish. Even if they don't believe in God and don't believe, they have a very hard time disconnecting themselves because there's very, very deep inside them, there is something that just wants to be connected. So now, based on that thought process, that Tanya began a whole discussion of, wait a second, so we all have this powerful desire inside of us to connect to God. Gosh, let's use it. Why is it hiding deep inside me? Why is it waiting for these extreme situations in which I might be facing, I want to use it in my everyday life. I want to use it to be able to connect to God on a Tuesday morning. So the Tanya says, well, maybe once we understand this philosophy, it's going to enable us to utilize it. What's the philosophy? We deviated for a few chapters to understand the unity of God and the unity of all of creation with God. And in chapter 23, we kind of come back into the conversation and we say, well, now that I understand that everything is really godliness and that every action that I take is an opportunity to not just to connect, but actually to just reaffirm God and to say, yes, there is a God. I am connected to this God. And next chapter is going to be the negative flip side, which is every time I make a decision to go against God's will, in that moment, I am denying God's existence. I'm basically saying, yes, God thinks this way, and I actually want to do something different because that's too difficult for me. When I understand this concept, it might make it easier for me to tap into that innermost core love that I have because I know that deep down, I really just want to be connected. Maybe if I realize the power of every moment to either be connected or, God forbid, disconnected, I can tap into those deeper resources that really just want to be connected. Because when I see mitzvahs as just a whole bunch of, optional points that I could get on my chart or not get on my chart, I could be like, I did 100 today. I don't need to do anymore. Or I did all these good things. I don't, the kosher one, that's too difficult for me. I'm not going to do that one. Or the honesty one, I'll do everything else right. I'm not going to be honest. I have enough points with God. When I actually realize that every single mitzvah is an opportunity to either affirm that, yes, God is everything and this is God's world, or God forbid the opposite, to say, no, actually, I don't believe in God's unity, then that can really push me to want to make the right choice every time, to have an easier time making the right choice every time. That's kind of where chapter 23 falls into the discussion. The discussion is continued in chapter 24 and 25 to kind of wrap up this whole idea of how to utilize this deep inner love that we have that's usually hidden. Thoughts, questions? Sorry, Raina, I'm only seeing this now. Okay, any thoughts or questions? I didn't see. Yes, Harriet?
When we talk about the organs that the mitzvah are compared to organs, organs don't have soul.
Organs don't have soul. Well, that's an interesting point because would I say that there is soul in my toes? It sounds funny to say that, but practically speaking, where is my soul? My soul's in all of me. My soul is much more revealed in my head. My soul is much more revealed in my mind. But can I say that there's part of my body that doesn't have soul in it? All of my body is, you know, uh, encompassing my soul. So yeah, even my toes and my fingernails, all of me is soul. Sorry, all of me holds soul. So when I fulfill one of the 248 commandments, I am connecting with God's limbs directly. Now, of course, it's all just a visual for us. again, like we don't actually say that God has 248 limbs. It's, our way of being able to understand how we can connect to God, because the only analogy that we can really use is ourselves, of how we know ourselves and how we know people to function. Does that answer your question?
So if we use our hand to do a mitzvah, there's soul that's in our hand. Part of our soul.
At that moment, my physical hand, the energy that I invest into moving my hand, any part of me that's involved, actually, not only that, the food that I ate that gave me the energy to move my hand, all of that is now connected to God at this moment in a very deep unity. So, we ask, how do we elevate the world around us? That's one of the ways. When I encounter something in the world and I say, well, how can I use this for a mitzvah? How can I use, I come across new material. I come across ideas. I come across music. I come across a talent that I have. Everything in the world is intended to be uplifted and connected. When I figure out how to incorporate these things into a mitzvah, I am literally, connecting and elevating all the different parts of creation. Somebody asked, does God allow us to connect to him without doing mitzvahs? I would phrase it differently. Not does God allow us to connect to him. God tells us that this is how you connect to me. You connect to me through doing my mitzvahs. Mitzvah literally comes from the Aramaic word tzavta, which means connection. God says, this is how I want you to connect to me. So, do you want to think about me and dream about me? You could, but if you want to really connect to me, do a mitzvah. It's like, having a crush on someone, and it never really evolves into a relationship because it's always just in my head. I never actually do anything to advance this relationship. So, I guess having a connection with God without doing mitzvahs, I mean, I haven't seen this anywhere, but I'm thinking like the way I see it, it's like having a crush on God. It's like I love God to pieces, but I actually don't want to do anything that he wants me to do. So how are you going to take that love and that desire for connection? How are you going to make it tangible? How are you going to act on this love? And I think that the reason someone might ask this question is maybe because doing mitzvahs feels difficult. But I want to remind everyone that don't think of the hardest mitzvahs. Think of all the mitzvahs you already do. There isn't a Jew in the world who doesn't already fulfill mitzvahs. There are 613 commandments. There are so many things that you're already doing. Some of them you're aware of and some of them you're not aware of. And now you just have to think, where can I try to grow and stretch myself just a little bit more? For some, it's in the food department. For some, it's in the Shabbat department. For some, it's in the kindness department. And for some people, it's with honesty and business. And for some people, it's with charity. We all have our different areas that we need to push ourselves a little more, and we could push ourselves a little more. Anyone else? Okay, well, either that was very simple, we didn't get a lot of questions, or it was just so complicated that it just kind of went over. So either way, have a great week, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next week. Feel free to stay on if you want to chat or ask questions. And
Well, can I say something to Rena? Are you still here? I don't know if her microphone's not working.
I am. I'm here.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, like, things like prayer is mitzvah. Like, praying. Things like saying the Shema every day is a mitzvah. Things like Modeh Ani first thing in the morning, that's a mitzvah. Like, there are so many ways to connect to God that aren't like the way we think. I mean, I think there's a ton that you're doing probably that aren't these huge ones. And I think that's what Deanie is trying to say is like, chances are you're living a life of doing mitzvah after mitzvah after mitzvah. You just may not be classifying them as mitzvot.
But
But
Lorraine,
if you feel connected to God when you're doing them, I think like me when I'm super kind and do nice things for rando people that I don't know, I'm like, God is working through me. I'm not this good a human. Like, or when I know Lola thinks I'm upset. um yeah, so anyway, Raina, I think you're already doing it. Like that would be my
Lorraine,
answer, right?
Lorraine, I wanted to add something to that. I don't know if I said this before, but I heard this funny story about a lecturer who was giving a talk about the power of mitzvahs. And there was I believe it was in Israel. And unfortunately, in Israel specifically, I guess it's that high concentration of Jews, people feel the need very much to classify themselves and give themselves labels. I'm this kind of Jew, I'm that kind of Jew, I'm religious, I'm not religious, I'm semi-religious. Wherever they land on the spectrum, they need to give themselves a title. So after his lecture, and his lecture was about the power of doing mitzvahs, and a woman gets up and she says, Rabbi, I'm so disturbed by your speech. I mean, you everything you said is so inspiring and so true, and I really want to do all these mitzvahs, but I'm not a religious person. Like, can I do mitzvahs without being religious? Like, I don't want to be a religious person. I just want to do mitzvahs because they just seem so incredible. And he looks at her, he's like thinking of the irony that she probably didn't even realize the irony of what she was saying. He's like, please, don't become a religious person. Just do as many mitzvahs as you can. She's like, oh, phew, and she sat down. But, sometimes what limits us from, stops us from doing a mitzvah is that we give ourselves certain label. I'm this kind of Jew. I'm that kind of Jew. I'm not the other kind of Jew. So I shouldn't be doing that one because that's only for that type of Jewish person. Like, let's get out of the labels. We're all Jewish. The mitzvahs are for all of us. Let's try to do as many mitzvahs as we can. And I believe we already are doing a whole lot.
We're showing up here.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.